Tonight we're slipping into the flickering candlelight of medieval Europe, where dinner is never just dinner, and the stars on your plate might matter more than the ones in the sky. Picture this. The cobblestone streets are damp from last night's rain. You're wrapped in wool that smells faintly of smoke and thyme. Somewhere, a dog is barking at nothing, and you, dear guest, are about to be late for a dinner party that has been meticulously scheduled according to the planetary alignments. Because apparently, Saturn doesn't just rule melancholy, it also decides whether to serve duck or beef. And if you arrive when Mercury's in the wrong house, well, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Drop your city and local hour in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a town that smells faintly of beer and horses, and it's just past Vespers. The baker has already snuffed out his oven, the blacksmith's hammer has gone silent, and the real excitement is just beginning behind the thick oak doors of a minor noble's hall. You're invited, but not because you're charming or influential. You're here because your birth sign is Libra, and that balances out the Virgo rising of the host's third cousin. Don't ask. Just smile and knock. Inside, things are buzzing. But not with prep, oh no. The cook isn't even allowed to crack eggs until the house astrologer confirms the moon is in a fertile sign. Which tonight, it is not. So you stand there awkwardly, watching a man in a robe argue with a woman holding a parsnip. In medieval Europe, astrology wasn't just background flavor, it was a practical tool. Church services, battles, marriages, and yes, meals. Especially if those meals were meant to impress someone important or ward off gout. Historians still argue whether astrology truly shaped daily choices or if it was more of a justification for decisions already made. But one thing's clear, if you wanted your goose to be crispy and your guests not to brawl, you checked the heavens first. The wealthy had personal astrologers, or at least access to one through their physician or priest. These weren't starry-eyed romantics. They were educated, often university-trained, charting planetary positions with the same seriousness a modern chef might approach food safety protocols. And if the stars said no stew on Tuesdays, you obeyed. The atmosphere in the hall is heavy with anticipation and beeswax. Candles flicker, casting shadows shaped like dancing phantoms on the tapestried walls. The smell of damp stone mingles with dried rosemary bundles dangling from the rafters. You shift on your feet, noticing that everyone else is waiting. No one eats, not even the dogs sneaking under the long wooden table. One dog licks a dropped plum. That dog might be doomed. The astrologer, a man with a beard so long it could have its own title, finally nods. The moon has entered Cancer, excellent for dishes involving dairy and soft textures. A gong rings, and suddenly the kitchen bursts into motion like a trapdoor opening beneath your feet. You trail into the kitchen and immediately regret it. There's a pot bubbling with something suspiciously green, a pheasant being aggressively defeathered, and a cook muttering under her breath about Jupiter's bloated influence. A boy carries a bundle of herbs marked "Do not use until Venus is ascending," and promptly drops them. He looks around. No one notices. He tosses them into the stew anyway. Every meal begins with the elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and their alignment with the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Yes, you're already regretting that second helping of cheese. Tonight, since Mars is in Leo, the mood is considered warm and dry. That means foods that are cooling and moist should be prioritized to balance the body. This is why dinner starts with cucumbers and melon, followed by a tepid porridge that tastes like sadness. A woman at the end of the table clears her throat and says, "I knew it would be porridge tonight, my sciatica's been acting up." Everyone nods solemnly. The stars are strong in her. Here's your first mainstream historical fact. The Taquinum Sanitatis, a medieval health handbook, often included astrological guidance for diet and daily routine. It wasn't just folklore, it was studied and followed. These guides even listed which zodiac signs ruled different body parts, and suggested foods to heal corresponding ailments. Tonight's meal is set according to the waxing moon, which is perfect for growing things like salad greens, optimism, and possibly fungal infections. You watch as a bowl of pickled carrots is passed around and someone murmurs, "Excellent for the spleen." You smile and nod, because that seems like the safest move. The room warms with candlelight and mild political gossip. You glance up at the ceiling, painted with constellations. Above you, Cassiopeia shimmers beside a smoky wooden beam. A young man across the table catches your eye and raises an eyebrow, gesturing subtly toward the food. "Capricorn day," he mouths. "No onions." You pretend to understand. In reality, you're still wondering why the bread smells like fennel and regret. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some hosts believed specific stars had flavors. No, really. Jupiter was said to taste sweet, Saturn bitter, and Mars spicy or sharp. So if Mars was dominant, you might get heavily peppered meat, or if Venus reigned, honey-glazed everything. Tonight is a Mercury evening, which explains why the soup tastes like indecision. As the meal drifts lazily into its second hour, someone sneezes. The room pauses. Sneezing while the moon is in a mutable sign? That's a bad omen. You take a sip of your wine, carefully brewed under a Sagittarius waxing gibbous for optimism and robust digestion. It tastes fine. Maybe a little ambitious. Still, no one wants to be the first to stop eating. That would break the flow of the event, disrupt the planetary harmony. So you keep nibbling, hoping your Libra stomach can handle whatever is next. The host leans over and whispers, "Next course, pears in clove syrup. Perfect for a Gemini moon." You don't know what that means, but it's delicious. You lean back a little, the bench beneath you groaning in sympathy. Your stomach is full, but not uncomfortably so, like it somehow knows the meal was carefully engineered for your personal astrological resonance. Of course, no one asked your birth chart. They just assumed. You look like a Virgo, apparently. You're still not sure if that's a compliment or a warning. From across the long table, the head cook emerges like a theater queen during a curtain call. She wipes her hands on a linen apron and gives the room a nod, not to be mistaken for a beau. Behind her, a nervous teenage boy holds a waxed parchment listing the day's planetary table. He's squinting at it like it holds nuclear codes. Spoiler, it kind of does. Tonight's menu was no haphazard affair. Every course was aligned with astrological rulerships. Not just by moon phase or zodiac sign, but by planetary hour, a hyperspecific window of time governed by a planet's energetic sway. So when the pheasant was roasted, it was done in the hour of Mars, giving it boldness. The pears were poached during the hour of Venus. Romantic. Moist. Here's a solid mainstream historical fact to chew on. Medieval medical and dietary theory, influenced heavily by Galenic principles, linked planets to humoral qualities. Jupiter was warm and moist, Saturn cold and dry, and so on. These associations didn't just stay in dusty textbooks, they were served on your plate. Literally. So you're not just being fed, you're being alchemized. And then there's the zodiac chef. Not an actual title, but it might as well be. At every wealthy household, someone, whether cook, physician, or priest, would obsessively track the astrological calendar and align the entire kitchen's operations to it. Because your stomach, dear guest, is under celestial jurisdiction. Every zodiac sign rules a body part. Aries, the head. Taurus, the neck and throat. Sagittarius, the thighs. This wasn't esoteric trivia, it was a blueprint. If the moon passed through Taurus, Meals were designed to ease throat ailments. Think warming stews, soft breads, and maybe a little honey. Virgo moon? Digestive tonics and herbs. Maybe fennel. Maybe regret. A scholar once called this edible astrology. Historians still argue whether these practices were taken seriously or served more as highbrow entertainment for bored nobles. But when you watch a man delay soup service because Venus entered the wrong house, you start to suspect they meant it. You glance down at your plate. It's clean, save for a single candied violet you've been avoiding. You're told it's good for the nerves when Mercury's on the rise. Right now, Mercury's apparently having a great night. You eat it. Tastes like perfume and flower anxiety. The woman to your left, wearing what appears to be a squirrel pelt hat, leans in and says, "Did you know Sagittarius meals favor spiced wines and pheasant?" You nod politely, but she's not done. "I only cook cabbage when the moon's in Capricorn. Keeps the gas in check." She smiles sweetly. You'll learn. In case you're wondering, yes, there were actual medieval cookbooks that listed astrological guidance alongside recipes. Not in the add salt sense, but in the don't bake this if Saturn is combust way. These weren't mere kitchen notes, they were protective rituals. And no dish was immune. Roast. Mars. Custard. Venus. Eel pie. A nightmare, but usually Mercury. There's even a documented belief that eggs scrambled under a waning moon wouldn't bind properly. Which, let's face it, is just a solid excuse if breakfast goes wrong. A fringe tidbit that might raise your eyebrows: some cooks believed that planetary energies could be trapped or neutralized by carving certain sigils into the dough crusts or meat fat. So if you cut into your pie and see something that looks like a small angry sun, that's not a prank. That's magical shielding. For digestion. Now the next course comes out, carried solemnly by a boy who can't be older than 10. His arms shake slightly under the weight of a giant trencher piled with barley, herbs, and what looks like quail hearts. It lands in front of you with a soft thunk, and everyone claps politely. You do too. It's the kind of moment that feels both ridiculous and deeply sincere. The host stands and raises his cup. To Saturn, who keeps our bowels honest. A toast. You blink. Others nod like this makes perfect sense. Apparently, Saturn governs restrictions and bodily control. So this is the constipation course. You start to notice how guests react to the food emotionally and astrologically. One man pouts after a too spicy dish, muttering something about being a Pisces and not built for this aggression. A woman refuses the wine because it was blessed under an unfriendly conjunction. A child refuses bread entirely, claiming the grain wasn't milled under a fertile sign. His father sighs and hands him an apple. Apples are always neutral. Then there's the fire. Not metaphorical passion, actual kitchen flames. Certain ingredients were roasted over very specific wood types, depending on their planetary ruler. For instance, Mars-ruled foods might be cooked over oak for boldness, while Venus foods would require sweet applewood smoke. Tonight's bread was baked over hazel branches. You're told it's aligned with Mercury. You taste it again. Still just bread. By the way, not every dish made it to the table. Some were vetoed entirely by the astrologer's daily read. If the moon's in Scorpio, that eel tart someone spent hours on? Cancelled. Bad digestion. Too watery. Causes melancholia. Into the compost it goes. The cook doesn't mind. She believes every failed dish absorbs the misfortune meant for the diners. This is either very poetic or a very clever way to explain her worst pie attempt. You chew slowly now, trying to feel the planetary intention of your barley. Is it warming your spirit? Balancing your bile? Or just chewy? And here comes another astrologically sanctioned moment, wiping your mouth. Not just a hygiene thing. Depending on the planetary hour, Even small gestures were best timed. For example, wiping your hands in a Mars hour might signal aggression. Under a Venus hour, it's flirtatious. You freeze mid-wipe. It's Jupiter now. You decide that means confident but spiritually curious. Laughter bubbles from the end of the table. A dog has gotten hold of the Saturn plate and is gleefully running off with a sausage. He'll regret that tomorrow, someone murmurs. You don't ask if they mean digestion or karmic alignment. Another historical gem for you: astrological planning for meals wasn't exclusive to nobles. Even some monasteries kept celestial records to schedule fasts, feasts, and herbal medicine prep. In fact, many herbs in monastery gardens were grouped by planetary ruler: lavender for Mercury, sage for Jupiter, etc. A bell rings. The host sighs. We missed the Venus hour. There's a collective slump. It means no sweetmeats tonight. The cook looks devastated. We had cinnamon figs ready, she whispers. They were perfect. You mentally note that missing a Venus hour is apparently dinner party tragedy level 10. But there's always another alignment. Another hour. Another chance to get the seasoning right. As the plates are cleared and the candles flicker lower, you realize something oddly comforting about it all. Chaos, cloaked in order. Confusion, wearing the robes of certainty. You can't control your guests, the weather, or whether the pheasant was underdone, but you can blame Mercury. And as far as excuses go, that's pretty stellar. You're barely done patting your belly, still uncertain whether that last spoonful of barley was meant to align your chakras or just fill you up, when you notice the next layer of the evening unfolding. Not dessert. Not yet. No, this is something far subtler. Something deeply medieval. Something forkless. Yes, you're now navigating planetary table manners. Let's start here. You don't have a fork. No one does. The fork is considered suspicious in most of Europe at this point, either too feminine, too devilish, or just too Italian. Instead, you eat with a spoon, your knife, and your fingers. And if you've been paying attention, when you choose to slurp, slice, or sip might matter more than how you do it. Because in this world, etiquette isn't just about politeness, it's also a cosmic act. If you chew too aggressively during a Mars hour, it's said to invite discord. Too slow during a Saturn hour? Melancholy may settle over your plate like a gravy-thick fog. Across the table, a young woman dabs delicately at her lips with a linen square. Her movements are so precise, so celestial, it's like she's rehearsing for an astral ballet. You look down at your own stained napkin and wonder what your dabbing says about your moon sign. Possibly clumsy goat. Tonight, manners are dictated by planetary influences and everyone's watching. That man who didn't say thank you when handed a roasted pear, probably cursed to 7 years of romantic bad luck. Or maybe he's just a Capricorn. A mainstream fact worth tucking under your hat. Planetary hours, first documented by Hellenistic astrologers and refined in medieval texts, divided each day and night into 12 unequal segments, each ruled by a planet. This practice didn't just guide medicine and prayer but also, believe it or not, table behavior. So now, as the evening trickles on and the air thickens with mulled wine and wood smoke, you start to feel it. Not just the warmth, not just the buzz of good company, but the underlying sense that you're in a ritual. A timed dance with the cosmos. A forkless waltz, if you will. Someone spills gravy. It happens in the hour of the moon, a time associated with fluidity, forgetfulness, and emotion. The astrologer barely lifts his eyes from the chart. As expected, he murmurs. Everyone nods sagely, even the guy mopping his lap. And here's a fringe tidbit you won't find in most schoolbooks. In some elite circles, people believed burping during a Venus hour was a sign of appreciation, and during a Mars hour, an act of aggression. Same sound, different star. This made public digestion a kind of performance art. If you've ever timed a sneeze during a Zoom call, you understand the pressure. Across the table, a man begins carving his bread with slow, deliberate strokes. The room hushes slightly, as if all eyes are waiting to see whether he'll cut toward or away from himself. Cutting toward oneself during a Mercury hour? Symbolic of internal reflection. Cutting away? Possibly hostile. You've never been so stressed watching someone make a sandwich. Still, you give it a try. You reach for your spoon just as the astrologer murmurs something about Jupiter rising. You pause. Is this the moment for generosity? Or did he just mean that you can go back for seconds? The meat arrives next, roasted duck with a mysterious sauce. No one reaches for it immediately. Instead, the host raises a small hourglass and flips it. You blink. What is happening? Time management at dinner, apparently, is not about the oven, it's about energy flow. Every food category, meats, grains, sweets, has a designated planetary vibe. Meats, Mars. Grains, Mercury. Sweets, Venus, obviously. And the time you eat them, that matters. You must not cross the planetary streams, or you risk culinary chaos. One man tries to sneak a fig tart before its hour and gets a gentle slap on the wrist from a surprisingly alert grandmother. Not in Venus time, she hisses. What are you, Roman? The tension breaks when someone attempts a toast and forgets to point their cup in the correct cardinal direction. East, ruled by the rising sun, is the safest. West, emotional turmoil. North, illness. South, too hot. You sip tentatively, aiming southwest. Feels like a compromise. Historians still debate whether medieval etiquette rules were truly astrologically timed or just layered with celestial flair after the fact to impress guests. Either way, the effect is powerful. It feels like dining in a clock tower built by the gods, every action a tick in the gears. Then there's the silence. It hits halfway through the duck, during a Saturn hour. People slow their chewing. No one speaks. You start to whisper something about the sauce and immediately feel like you've broken a church vow. The host lifts a finger, eyes closed. We honor the hour, he intones. Everyone nods. You chew slowly, feeling like you're in a medieval meditation retreat with duck fat. And oh, those are transitions. They're announced. Not with bells, but with subtle cues. A new candle lit. A dried sprig of rosemary burned near the hearth. You watch the signs like they're part of a sacred game. Because if you miss the shift, your next bite might be cosmically inappropriate. Another moment you won't forget. A small child suddenly stands and recites a rhyme about Mars and mustard. Apparently, mustard shouldn't be eaten during Mars hour or it spices the blood and heats the mind. Everyone claps. The child bows. You're not sure if he just recited astrology or cursed someone. As your cup is refilled again, strong red wine this time, laced with cinnamon, you realize just how far-reaching this etiquette dance goes. Seating order. Conversation topics. Even how loudly you laugh. All filtered through the lens of planetary etiquette. And believe it or not, it's kind of calming. Like knowing there's a cosmic rulebook for social awkwardness. Can't remember someone's name? Mercury retrograde. Made a weird joke. Mars influence. Forgot to pass the salt. Saturn demands restraint. By the time dessert does arrive, tiny puffs of honey-drenched dough, sprinkled with what looks like gold dust, you've all entered what can only be described as celestial dining flow state. No one rushes. No one fidgets. Even the dog has curled up under the table, presumably awaiting his own star chart. The last toast of the hour is offered with smiles. The astrologer announces that the Venus window is closing, and anything sweet eaten after this might bring sadness instead of pleasure. You take one last bite. Just in time. Sweet, golden, and suspiciously like the best thing you've tasted all night. You lean back once again, this time more confident. You've survived a dinner under the stars, guided by ancient math, murky myth, and a shocking amount of duck. You didn't offend Jupiter. You didn't burp during Mars. And you remembered to dab, not wipe. That's what we call etiquette excellence, medieval style. You're still basking in your minor triumph over planetary manners, feeling like you've earned at least a bronze medal in medieval table choreography when the room subtly shifts again. The candles are dimmed, a window is cracked to let in the night air, and someone mutters, "Moon's nearly full." That, apparently, changes everything. Because tonight isn't just about etiquette and flavor. Oh no. Now comes the real sorcery. What you eat, and when, depends entirely on the phase of the moon. You glance at the long wooden table where servants are now bringing out covered platters with the slow drama of a magic show. A hush falls over the guests. No one claps, but you can tell they want to. These aren't just dishes, they're lunar declarations. Tonight the moon is waxing, moving from new toward full, and that means the body is believed to be in a gathering phase, absorbing, growing, storing. So meals tonight are rich, bold, and meant to build your inner constitution. Roast meats, root vegetables, heavy stews. That weirdly satisfying sense of fullness after 3 bites. Blame the moon. And here's a mainstream historical fact to stir into your soup. Lunar phases were central to medieval medical theory and farming alike. Physicians used the moon to time bloodlettings, while farmers watched it to plant or harvest crops. So it was no stretch at all for dinner planners to do the same, especially since food was seen as both medicine and moral influence. The astrologer at the head of the table gestures, and a servant uncovers a bowl of lentils so fragrant it practically sings. You overhear someone say, "Perfect for a waxing moon, builds blood and makes good dreams." Another guest adds, "Unless you're melancholic." Then it thickens the humors. You nod like that makes sense, because everyone else is nodding too. The host explains, if it were a waning moon, we'd serve light broth. Something cleansing. And here's the key, a waning moon meant the body was shedding, releasing, letting go. So you'd want diuretics, detoxifiers, and nothing too heavy. Turnips, barley water, and herbal teas that taste vaguely like regret. You're quickly learning that in medieval cosmology, the moon wasn't just a rock in the sky, it was a culinary mood ring. Now someone clinks a spoon against a goblet gently, but deliberately. It's time for the humor check. Not a comedy set. A literal bodily humor check. You are now being asked, silently but communally, to reflect on your internal balance. Are you warm or cold? Dry or moist? This determines whether you should take more lentils or just stick to the wine. The woman across from you declares herself phlegmatic tonight, so she refuses the stew and asks for a quince. To dry the damp, she says. You nod approvingly, despite having no idea what your own internal humidity might be. Here's your quirky fringe tidbit of the evening. Some medieval dinner guides warned that eating under a full moon could cause madness or dreams so vivid they bordered on prophecy. So if your dessert comes with a side of terrifying sleepwalking, well, now you know why. The duck from earlier? That was picked because the moon is waxing in a fire sign, Leo, which boosts digestion and vitality. Had the moon been in Pisces, a water sign, you'd be sipping fish broth and maybe doing a light spiritual cleanse. The cook, it seems, keeps a zodiac wheel pinned to the pantry wall like a sacred grocery list. You take a bite of something roasted and slightly sweet, beets, maybe, and ask the person next to you if it's safe to eat. They reply, "Oh yes. Moon in Leo favors root vegetables. Strong energy, groundedness, good for your spleen." You chew slowly, hoping your spleen appreciates the attention. And let's not forget the drinks. Yes, the wine you're sipping was decanted at exactly the midpoint between the moon's highest arc and its descent, to catch the moment of balance. Or so the astrologer says, after swirling it and sniffing like a lunar sommelier. You take another sip. Still tastes like wine. Maybe a little confident. Historians still argue whether these lunar dining practices were truly widespread or limited to elite circles obsessed with ritual. Some suggest the moon's culinary influence was more symbolic, a way to add mystery and prestige to otherwise ordinary meals. Others believe entire kitchens operated under its watchful glow, especially in monastic or courtly settings. You start to notice the moon references piling up. The cheese platter includes moon-aged goat cheese. The bread is shaped like crescents. Someone makes a joke about lunacy and gets a polite chuckle. The child who recited the mustard poem earlier is now holding up a silver coin to reflect moonlight onto his plate. He calls it blessing the butter. It's adorable. Possibly haunted. The air outside hums with a gentle breeze. Someone pulls back a curtain, revealing the moon herself, hovering pale and curious in the dark sky. The whole room falls silent for a moment. You feel like you're inside a painting or a dream being dreamed by a medieval monk after too much honey cake. And then, just when you think you've reached peak lunar weirdness, the next dish arrives, pickled herring. You freeze. Because you've heard whispers. During certain moon phases, pickled foods were considered risky. Not because of spoilage, although, let's be honest, it is pickled herring, but because of the moon's influence on fermentation. Too much moisture in the air. Waning moon in Cancer. That fish might explode. And now it's in front of you. You lean back slowly, just in case. The astrologer glances at it and gives a tiny nod. Safe tonight, he says. Moon favors brine. The entire table exhales. The herring is scooped onto plates. You try a bite. Tangy. Slightly dangerous. Like eating a dare. Someone whispers, last month, the jar popped. Took out an entire shelf. You chew more carefully. By now, dessert is being planned, based, naturally, on the next moon sign. Virgo's coming up soon, so the sweets must be simple, herbal, and supportive of digestion. No sugar bombs. Think candied fennel seeds and lavender biscuits. You feel both disappointed and relieved. Then a candle sputters out unintentionally, it seems, but the room reacts like an owl just spoke Latin. The cook's assistant gasps. It's an omen, she mutters. The moon doesn't want cream tonight. No one serves the custard. Instead, a replacement appears, dried plums and crushed almonds, arranged in crescent shapes on a pewter tray. No cream. No scandal. Just silent reverence for the night's celestial veto. And here's the strange part, it all feels reasonable. Not logical, maybe, but deeply human. Like trusting your gut with extra backup from the galaxy. Sure, it might be moon madness. Or maybe it's just an elaborate way to pay attention. Because in a world without refrigeration, antibiotics, or reliable weather, you cling to the sky. And if the stars and moon can't keep your pickles from exploding, at least they give you a reason to keep looking up. You finish the last of your wine just as the moon hits her zenith, bathing the whole hall in silvery light. Someone begins to hum. Someone else starts braiding rosemary stems into little wreaths. You sit back, content and only slightly terrified of the herring. One more course to go. And 1,000 stars still watching. You awake from a momentary food-induced trance, blinking slowly like a sleepy cat as the guests around you begin to shuffle slightly in their seats. There's a shift in the air. Not quite a breeze, not quite a mood change. It's the psychic equivalent of a throat clearing. And then you realize, the astrologer is back on his feet. This time, he's holding a scroll. Not a menu. A guest chart. You've heard rumors. Whispers, really. That some noble hosts plan their guest lists not by political standing, not by family loyalty, And certainly not by who brings the best wine, but by astrological compatibility. Tonight, you see it firsthand. He unrolls the scroll with a dramatic flourish. Names and birth dates scrawled in ink, surrounded by strange sigils and planetary symbols. It looks like a seating chart collided with a horoscope and ran through a spice rack. You were invited not because of your sparkling conversation or your inexplicable knowledge of pigeon migration patterns, but because your star sign harmonizes with the merchant's daughter sitting 2 seats to your right. That's right, your mood insurance. It's not personal. It's planetary. A mainstream historical fact to digest here. Medieval astrologers used a technique called synastry to compare natal charts and determine compatibility, be it for marriage, partnership, or in tonight's case, not causing a scene over the carrot stew. The host wanted a smooth evening. No arguments, no mood swings, and definitely no Venus-Mars food fights. So he handed his astrologer a list of potential invitees and got back, well, this scroll. You were cleared for attendance. That merchant's daughter, a fiery Aries. You, with your placid Libra energy, perfect balance. Someone behind you snorts with laughter. Last week they seated 3 Scorpios in a row, he whispers. Ended with a lute on fire. You don't ask for details. You absolutely want to. The astrologer begins announcing names, not aloud, but in conversation. You hear him mention how Brother Walter's Leo moon is in harmony with Lady Elise's Gemini rising, and how that's why they're both seated near the wine. Good energy, he says, with a knowing smile. You glance over. They do seem to be giggling a lot. Possibly plotting something. Probably harmless. Still, there are precautions. You notice how the guests have been buffered. That's the term. Each high-voltage personality is flanked by 2 calmer signs. A Sagittarius bookended by 2 gentle Pisceans. A cranky Capricorn mellowed by a diplomatic Libra. It's like watching emotional bubble wrap in action. And of course, the astrological outliers, the truly combustible pairings, are placed at opposite ends of the table. You see a man with intense Scorpio eyebrows glowering from one end, while a peppy Gemini waves her spoon enthusiastically from the other. They will never meet. By design. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some noble families were so invested in guest harmony that they created astrological screening documents, forms where guests would list their birth date and time before being formally invited. RSVP with your moon sign, or don't bother showing up. Think of it as a 14th century version of zodiac Tinder. Swipe left on Saturn conjunct Saturn. You take a slow sip of wine and glance down the table. You start noticing patterns you'd missed earlier. That entire corner of the room. Air signs. Talking non-stop. Plates barely touched. The trio near the fire. Earth signs, eating slowly, nodding sagely. That guy refilling everyone's drinks and trying too hard. You'd bet your boots he's a Leo. There's method to this medieval madness. Even the order of serving follows the zodiac wheel. Aries first, impulsive, impatient. Pisces last, distracted, dreamy, always somehow late. You remember how your duck dish was warm when it arrived, and wonder if you were just high enough on the zodiac ladder to matter. Historians still argue whether this form of planning was actually practiced or just theorized in astrological texts. Some believe it was more symbolic, used in royal courts to flatter astrologers and give nobles a sense of order. Others insist these rituals shaped real social structure, especially in tense diplomatic feasts where not offending someone was a matter of survival. In this room, at least, it's very real. And surprisingly effective. There's a contented hum in the air. The conversation flows easily, like honey warmed by candlelight. You see smiles, shared stories, even the occasional flirtatious glance. No thrown bread, no political outbursts, no accusations of heresy. That's what happens when your dinner table is curated by the stars. Of course, it's not just about harmony. Sometimes the guest list is a test. You hear one noble murmur to another, "I placed that duke next to the bishop on purpose. Mars square Mars. Wanted to see what would happen." They both laugh, clinking cups. So sometimes, yes, the stars are used like matches, curiously lit to see what burns. But most of the time, it's about preventing disaster. You hear a story about a feast ruined by two guests with opposing Venus signs who both fancied the same barmaid. Ended in a duel, someone says. Over pottage. The astrologer sighs. Could have been avoided. Another moment passes. A servant offers you a honeyed fig on a small wooden plate. You take it, mostly because everyone else does. The host raises his goblet again and announces, "Let this feast be remembered not only by our taste buds but by our stars." Everyone claps. Someone hiccups. A good omen, if timed correctly. You glance again at the chart still spread across the astrologer's table. It's now peppered with little notes, scribbled adjustments, maybe future improvements. Guest harmony, version 2.0. One last pairing is whispered behind you. That widow from Bruges. Sun in Taurus, moon in Libra. Pause. And she's sitting next to the merchant with the Venus-ruled beard. Silence. Then someone nods. Excellent potential. You smile quietly to yourself. Because in a world where food might be spoiled by moonlight and a burp could mean war, this kind of cosmic guest list doesn't just make sense, it feels like the only sane way to plan a party. And let's be honest, wouldn't you rather sit next to someone who's astrologically unlikely to stab you with a fish knife? Exactly. You're admiring your honeyed fig half-eaten, still glistening like a tiny gemstone under candlelight, when a strong yeasty aroma wafts through the room. A new batch of bread has arrived, still steaming, crust crackling like brittle parchment. But no one touches it. Not yet. Because before any bread is broken, the baker must confirm, is Venus ascendant? Now, you're not exactly sure what Venus has to do with carbs, but judging by the collective silence, she's got a lot to say. The baker, red-faced and flour-dusted, stands near the hearth with arms folded across his chest, eyes locked on the astrologer. It's a standoff between dough and destiny. And this isn't just pageantry. You're witnessing something oddly sacred, the belief that bread only rises properly when the stars agree. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, baking wasn't merely a craft, it was a ritual. Timing was everything. While yeast and temperature obviously mattered, bakers also followed celestial rhythms. They tracked the moon and stars, believing planetary influence could affect everything from the knead to the crumb. Tonight, the astrologer nods. Venus is indeed rising in the east, just past the shadow of the moon. The baker exhales, dramatically. Someone claps. Trays of bread begin to circulate, each loaf carefully wrapped in cloth to retain its warmth and, allegedly, its astrological virtue. You take one and tear it open. It smells like rosemary, fresh air, and minor destiny. The guest beside you whispers, Venus governs pleasure and soft textures. Bread baked in her hour is more tender. You take a bite. It is tender. Probably coincidence, or maybe not. A quirky fringe tidbit. Some bakers in medieval France reportedly carved planetary sigils onto loaves, tiny symbols representing Mars, Jupiter, or Venus, depending on what effect they hoped the bread would have. Strength, joy, fertility. Imagine biting into a baguette stamped with Jupiter's symbol, expecting it to help you win a joust. You chew more slowly. But baking is just the start. Rising dough, in fact, is part of a much bigger celestial kitchen dance. The grains used. Harvested during a waxing moon in Taurus, an earth sign known for stability and abundance. The flour was ground only during safe planetary hours, when Mercury wasn't retrograde, because no one wants miscommunication with a millstone. The water, drawn from a well that faces east, symbolic of renewal and rising hope. Yes, even the direction your bucket faces matters. You suddenly understand why dinner started 2 hours late. Now, historians still argue whether these practices were widespread among commoners or mainly reserved for elite households obsessed with mystical detail. But records do show that some bakers kept lunar calendars on their walls, and many towns had feast day baking customs aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary festivals. The bread, therefore, is not just food. It's a ritual of timing. You glance back at the baker, who's now standing proudly beside his loaves like a painter showing off a fresco. Someone compliments the airy crumb, and he beams. "Venus favors the patient," he says. "I let it rise during her whole hour." Now that the bread's been blessed by Venus, the dipping begins. Bowls of olive oil, herbed butter, and what looks like whipped cheese are passed around. But even here, yes, you guessed it, timing matters. Venus hours are for indulgence, so it's safe to dip your bread in rich spreads. But if the hour turns to Saturn, the mood shifts. Saturn prefers austerity. Dry bread only. Some guests stop dipping mid-swipe. You, however, take one last scoop before the hour changes. Rebel. A sudden burst of laughter comes from the far end of the table. The Gemini cluster. They're now making puns about sourdough starters and claiming to have invented the horoscope. Someone actually applauds. It's unclear whether it's for the joke or just the bread. Probably both. You take another bite and glance out the window, where the moon hangs low and pale like a watchful custodian. The stars are just beginning to shimmer. The guest across from you suddenly leans in, a piece of crust stuck to his beard. You ever heard the story of the baker who baked under the wrong sign? You shake your head, cautiously interested. Whole town got sick. Bread was dense. Angry. That's what they said. Mars was rising. Should have waited for Venus. He leans back dramatically. Never trusted red dough since. You don't ask what red dough is. You don't want to know. A servant appears with a small covered tray and whispers something into the baker's ear. He frowns, peeks under the cloth, and nods solemnly. Too much yeast. Rushed the rise. Venus dipped too early. He tosses the loaf into the fire. No one flinches. The moment is oddly beautiful, like a burnt offering to the goddess of good gluten. That's when you notice something else. People are blessing their bread. Not with a prayer, but with astrological gestures. A swirl of the hand, a tap of the thumb on the crust's peak, a whispered planetary name. It's subtle. It's strange. It's kind of wonderful. Another fun fact, in some traditions, people believed you could charge bread with intent. Eat during a Venus hour to inspire romance. Bake during Jupiter to encourage generosity. Share during Mercury to foster communication. Basically, edible magic. You finish your slice and feel cozy, like something just clicked. Or maybe that's the butter working its way through your system. Hard to say. The astrologer clears his throat. The hour turns now to Mercury. Speak, and be understood. This is the cue for toasts. One by one, guests stand and offer brief, poetic praises to the hosts, the cook, and the stars. Nothing long. Just enough to honor the hour. You raise your goblet in time, not wanting to disrupt the flow. Now the bread baskets are empty, the flames are low, and the air is filled with that warm, lingering scent of flour, herbs, and distant star maps. The baker removes his apron like a priest stepping away from the altar. It's strange. You didn't expect to care about the bread. But tonight it felt like the centerpiece of the universe, the thing everything orbited around. Not the meat, not the wine. Just bread. Soft, steaming, timed to the stars. You push your plate forward. A bit of crust remains. You decide to leave it. For luck. Or maybe for Venus. Either way, it feels right. You're wiping a few last breadcrumbs from your sleeve, when a ripple of subtle tension spreads down the table, so faint, it's like someone just lit a candle behind your back. You glance left, then right. Nobody's panicking, but something's happening. The astrologer raises an eyebrow and slowly unrolls another chart. Here it comes. The seating arrangement. Turns out, everything so far, every dish, toast, even that astrologically accurate bread, has been a warm-up act for the true masterpiece of the night, the astrological seating chart. You know how, in modern times, someone just plops down a place card and hopes Uncle Hugo doesn't offend the vegan poet? Yeah. This isn't that. Here, where you sit at dinner can determine everything from your digestion to your emotional equilibrium to your likelihood of falling into a dramatic feud over fennel. The astrologer taps his scroll and says, almost wistfully, had we placed Lady Isolde next to Lord Brenner, the sour cherries would have tasted bitter. People nod, solemnly. You nod too, not wanting to admit you have no idea what that means. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval physicians believed the human body mirrored the cosmos. This idea, called microcosm and macrocosm, meant that planetary forces didn't just influence the sky, they also lived inside you. So your placement at a dinner table? Not arbitrary. You're part of the celestial machine now. Your host walks behind you and adjusts your chair by about an inch. Closer to Mercury's influence, he murmurs. You'll digest better. You smile politely and immediately get a cramp in your lower back. Mercury's rude. Now, how do they decide who goes where? First, by elemental balance. The four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, each align with an element: air, water, earth, fire. Same goes for zodiac signs. So seating isn't just social, it's alchemical. If there are too many fire signs grouped together, someone's getting flambéed emotionally. So the astrologer sprinkles air and water signs nearby to cool things down. You're a Libra. That's air. So they parked you between a Taurus, earthy, stable, and a Cancer, watery, sentimental. The Taurus has been chewing in philosophical silence. The Cancer has cried twice, once during a toast, once when the dog stole her figure. So far, you're keeping the peace with the emotional diplomacy of a medieval therapist. Then there's the angle of your seat, yes, the literal angle. Some guests are turned slightly north, others to the east. This isn't feng shui, it's zodiacal orientation. Facing the rising sun is energizing, good for Aries. Facing west is reflective, ideal for Virgo or Pisces. You're facing northeast. That's Mercury-Venus crossover territory. Supposed to help with digestion and flirtation. Dangerous combo. Across the room, someone scoots their chair without asking the astrologer first. Everyone gasps. The candles flicker. The astrologer hisses through his teeth. That's how curses begin. The guest freezes and carefully inches the chair back to its original position. You pretend not to stare. Here's your quirky fringe tidbit. There are records from certain noble households where entire astrological blueprints were drafted before major feasts. These included not just the menu, but guest temperament predictions and seat-by-seat planetary influences. One surviving plan even includes a warning next to someone's name: tendency to argue during Mercury hour. Seat far from musicians. You shift slightly and notice a small emblem etched into the table near your plate, a barely visible circle with intersecting lines. The man next to you notices your gaze and whispers, "That's your house marker. 5th house of joy and digestion." You smile. You have no idea what that means, but it sounds fantastic. And yes, the 5th house is associated with pleasure, creativity, and the belly. So naturally, Those seated near this zone are expected to enjoy the meal most fully and make the best jokes. No pressure. Meanwhile, at the opposite end of the table, you spot what must be the Saturn quadrant. The lighting there is dimmer. The guests are older, wearing darker clothes, sipping small cups of herbal wine, and discussing taxes. You shudder and refocus on your fig. Now, if you're wondering whether people actually followed these seating systems without complaining, historians still argue about that. Some say astrology was more of a fashionable gimmick at noble tables. Others argue it was treated as seriously as the Bible in certain households. Given how no one here has even looked at the food since the astrologer started rearranging chairs, you're betting on the latter. Things get more intense when dessert arrives. Each serving tray is placed at exact intervals on the table, based on planetary correspondence. Figs and sweet cheeses by the Venus quadrant. Spiced almonds closer to Mars. Cinnamon pastries near Jupiter. You're handed a plum tart. This is either very good news, or a test. You accept it with grace and try not to seem too eager. The Cancer woman beside you sighs dramatically and says, "This tart was made for you. Look at the alignment." She gestures toward the windows, where stars are beginning to peek through the velvet sky. You're in your second house, Venus hour, cardinal quadrant. She's crying again. You nod gently and hand her a napkin. The astrologer steps forward with a final announcement. We have reached the cusp of Mars. All who remain seated must soften their gaze and eat slowly, lest passion consume the dish. You've never been told to chew gently in quite this way. But you obey. The tart is excellent. You definitely feel your second house opening, whatever that is. Conversation flows with careful grace. You realize that these placements, ridiculous as they seem, have created balance. There's no shouting. No awkward silences. No politics. Just quiet, orbiting conversations like little planets at the table. Until one person shifts their stool 3 inches left. Nobody breathes. The astrologer lowers his head. A guest coughs. A servant drops a spoon. The fire pops dramatically. And then, nothing happens. The guest grins. Just testing the stars. Half the room bursts into nervous laughter. The other half glares like he's just insulted Venus to her face. The moment passes, but it's a reminder. In this world, where comets are portents and bread rises with divine permission, even your seat at the table is loaded with meaning. You take another bite, adjust your chair a millimeter back, and thank the stars you're not in the Saturn corner. At least, not tonight. The plum tart has disappeared, and a warm lull settles over the table like a gentle fog. Someone sighs. A lute plucks in the background. You're starting to feel full, but not uncomfortably so. Just the kind of full where your thoughts get dreamy and your eyelids start to droop. Which is exactly why it's time to talk about farts. Yes, you heard that right. Because in medieval astrology, what went in had to come out, and every celestial body apparently had a say in your digestion. You glance down at your half-finished goblet of spiced wine and think, Mars better not mess this up. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. Medieval medical theory was governed by the balance of the 4 humors, black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. And astrologers believed that the planets didn't just govern emotions or fate, they also influenced the inner workings of your stomach. The moon ruled moisture and swelling. Mars, inflammation and heat. Saturn, dryness and constipation. So if the stars weren't lined up just right, that pottage you're sipping could turn into an internal storm. In fact, some manuals warned against eating certain foods on specific days of the planetary week. Mondays, ruled by the moon, were considered good for broths and soft things. Thursdays, Jupiter, were fine for rich meats. But Tuesdays, Mars Day, best to avoid beans, cabbage, onions, and any other food that might, shall we say, disrupt the harmony of the room. You feel a sudden spike of panic. Did someone serve cabbage tonight? The Cancer woman across from you has started fanning herself. She leans over and whispers, "Did you eat the buttered kale?" "I didn't." Saturn's in Leo. Terrible for the bowels. She shakes her head like someone dodging divine punishment. You nod solemnly and push your empty bowl away. You're about to make a clever joke about Mercury and flatulence when a servant walks by holding a tray of sliced root vegetables. They smell of vinegar and suspicion. A man to your right groans softly, clutches his side, and mutters, "Too much horseradish. Mars will make me pay." Here comes your quirky fringe tidbit. There's a surviving medieval document called the Taquinum Sanitatis, an illustrated health handbook, which describes the windiness of certain vegetables, especially cabbage, garlic, onions, and legumes. It warns that in times of Saturn these foods should be eaten with care or not at all, lest the belly be troubled and the air within misbehave. The air within misbehave. Imagine hearing that before your next dinner party. So yes, people literally planned their meals, including what not to eat, based on what planet was in charge of digestion that hour. And guess what? It gets even more specific. Each zodiac sign governs a different part of the body. Aries rules the head, Taurus the throat, Gemini the arms and lungs. But when it comes to digestion, all eyes turn to Virgo, ruler of the intestines. If the moon's in Virgo, dinner better be gentle. No greasy meats, no aged cheeses. Just something soft and moist, like oat gruel or milk pudding. You glance down at your plate and notice a sprig of mint beside your tart. The Taurus beside you, still munching, nudges you and says, "Mint calms the fire in the belly." Especially useful if Mars is peeking above the horizon. You pretend you already knew that and chew your mint like a medieval wellness influencer. Here's where things get even more intense. Some nobles had personal digestive astrologers, that is, someone whose job was not only to plan meals around the stars, but to record the guests' digestive responses in relation to the heavens. Imagine someone asking you after dinner, "How did that duck sit with you during Venus's trine to Mercury?" and writing it down in a leather-bound ledger. Historians still argue whether this was more performance than practicality. Was this celestial food planning truly followed, or just the medieval version of a dinner gimmick? After all, not everyone had access to fresh horoscopes or well-aligned fennel. Still, tonight's feast seems to be taking it seriously. The next course arrives, roasted turnips with a honey glaze. Sounds innocent, right? But you've been warned. Turnips are ruled by Saturn. And with Saturn currently in a dry aspect, they can cause sluggish digestion. You politely decline and suddenly realize several other guests do the same, shaking their heads with vaguely terrified expressions. Then someone tells the story of Lady Marjorie of Kent, who once ate a bowl of lentil stew during a full moon in Gemini. Her house reportedly smelled of sulfur for 3 days. No one visited again until Lent. You sip your wine to hide your laughter. The musicians shift to a softer melody. The lute is joined by a pipe, and the mood becomes contemplative. Someone recites a poem about the wind that travels from belly to stars. Everyone nods like this is the most profound thing they've ever heard. At this point, it's clear, digestion isn't just a private matter. It's an astral phenomenon. And it doesn't stop at gas. Bile was believed to be stirred up by Mars. Diarrhea, often blamed on a turbulent moon or a misaligned Mercury. Heartburn, that's the sun being too aggressive. They didn't just blame spicy food, they blamed solar aggression. A phrase you should definitely try next time you regret a taco. But the best, and by that, we mean strangest, belief. Some thought that the intensity of your dreams was influenced by how well your food had been digested in accordance with your ruling planet. So if you dream tonight of flying goats or talking pies, You'll know why. The Cancer lady is now drinking chamomile tea to please her lunar temperament. You're half tempted to ask for a cup. Someone else chews fennel seeds while muttering what sounds like a prayer to Jupiter. The smell of anise lingers in the air like perfume. The final test comes when a particularly enthusiastic Virgo stands up and exclaims, "The moon has moved into Libra. Balance. Harmony. Now we may take figs." Bowls of fresh figs are passed around, each one halved and filled with a dab of sweet cheese. Figs, associated with Venus, are believed to soothe the gut and the heart. You pop one into your mouth and immediately feel aligned. Maybe it's placebo. Maybe it's digestion magic. Who's to say? But as you lean back and sigh, you realize something. For all the absurdity, there's a strange, charming comfort in believing that the stars care whether your dinner gives you indigestion. Maybe astrology didn't cure anyone's gut troubles. But it sure gave them something to blame that wasn't the cook. You burp softly. The Cancer lady nods with sympathy and whispers, "Ah, Jupiter just peeked out. Happens to everyone." You smile. Maybe she's right. The plum tart has disappeared, and a warm lull settles over the table like a gentle fog. Someone sighs. A lute plucks in the background. You're starting to feel full, but not uncomfortably so. Just the kind of full where your thoughts get dreamy and your eyelids start to droop. Which is exactly why it's time to talk about farts. Yes, you heard that right. Because in medieval astrology, what went in had to come out, and every celestial body apparently had a say in your digestion. You glance down at your half-finished goblet of spiced wine and think, Mars better not mess this up. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. Medieval medical theory was governed by the balance of the four humors: black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. And astrologers believed that the planets didn't just govern emotions or fate, they also influenced the inner workings of your stomach. The moon ruled moisture and swelling. Mars, inflammation and heat. Saturn, dryness and constipation. So if the stars weren't lined up just right, that pottage you're sipping could turn into an internal storm. In fact, some manuals warned against eating certain foods on specific days of the planetary week. Mondays, ruled by the moon, were considered good for broths and soft things. Thursdays, Jupiter, were fine for rich meats. But Tuesdays, Mars Day, best to avoid beans, cabbage, onions, and any other food that might, shall we say, disrupt the harmony of the room. You feel a sudden spike of panic. Did someone serve cabbage tonight? The Cancer woman across from you has started fanning herself. She leans over and whispers, "Did you eat the buttered kale?" "I didn't." "Saturn's in Leo. Terrible for the bowels." She shakes her head like someone dodging divine punishment. You nod solemnly and push your empty bowl away. You're about to make a clever joke about Mercury and flatulence when a servant walks by holding a tray of sliced root vegetables. They smell of vinegar and suspicion. A man to your right groans softly, clutches his side, and mutters, "Too much horseradish. Mars will make me pay." Here comes your quirky fringe tidbit. There's a surviving medieval document called the Taquinum Sanitatis, an illustrated health handbook, which describes the windiness of certain vegetables, especially cabbage, garlic, onions, and legumes. It warns that in times of Saturn these foods should be eaten with care or not at all, lest the belly be troubled and the air within misbehave. The air within misbehave. Imagine hearing that before your next dinner party. So yes, people literally planned their meals, including what not to eat, based on what planet was in charge of digestion that hour. And guess what? It gets even more specific. Each zodiac sign governs a different part of the body. Aries rules the head, Taurus the throat, Gemini the arms and lungs. But when it comes to digestion, all eyes turn to Virgo, ruler of the intestines. If the moon's in Virgo, Dinner better be gentle. No greasy meats, no aged cheeses. Just something soft and moist, like oat gruel or milk pudding. You glance down at your plate and notice a sprig of mint beside your tart. The Taurus beside you, still munching, nudges you and says, "Mint calms the fire in the belly." Especially useful if Mars is peeking above the horizon. You pretend you already knew that and chew your mint like a medieval wellness influencer. Here's where things get even more intense. Some nobles had personal digestive astrologers, that is, someone whose job was not only to plan meals around the stars, but to record the guests' digestive responses in relation to the heavens. Imagine someone asking you after dinner, "How did that duck sit with you during Venus's trine to Mercury?" and writing it down in a leather-bound ledger. Historians still argue whether this was more performance than practicality. Was this celestial food planning truly followed, or just the medieval version of a dinner gimmick? After all, not everyone had access to fresh horoscopes or well-aligned fennel. Still, tonight's feast seems to be taking it seriously. The next course arrives, roasted turnips with a honey glaze. Sounds innocent, right? But you've been warned. Turnips are ruled by Saturn. And with Saturn currently in a dry aspect, they can cause sluggish digestion. You politely decline and suddenly realize several other guests do the same, shaking their heads with vaguely terrified expressions. Then someone tells the story of Lady Marjorie of Kent, who once ate a bowl of lentil stew during a full moon in Gemini. Her house reportedly smelled of sulfur for 3 days. No one visited again until Lent. You sip your wine to hide your laughter. The musicians shift to a softer melody. The lute is joined by a pipe, and the mood becomes contemplative. Someone recites a poem about the wind that travels from belly to stars. Everyone nods like this is the most profound thing they've ever heard. At this point, it's clear, digestion isn't just a private matter. It's an astral phenomenon. And it doesn't stop at gas. Bile was believed to be stirred up by Mars. Diarrhea, often blamed on a turbulent moon or a misaligned Mercury. Heartburn, that's the sun being too aggressive. They didn't just blame spicy food, they blamed solar aggression. A phrase you should definitely try next time you regret a taco. But the best, and by that, we mean strangest, belief. Some thought that the intensity of your dreams was influenced by how well your food had been digested in accordance with your ruling planet. So if you dream tonight of flying goats or talking pies, you'll know why. The Cancer lady is now drinking chamomile tea to please her lunar temperament. You're half tempted to ask for a cup. Someone else chews fennel seeds while muttering what sounds like a prayer to Jupiter. The smell of anise lingers in the air like perfume. The final test comes when a particularly enthusiastic Virgo stands up and exclaims, "The moon has moved into Libra. Balance. Harmony. Now we may take figs." Bowls of fresh figs are passed around, each one halved and filled with a dab of sweet cheese. Figs, associated with Venus, are believed to soothe the gut and the heart. You pop one into your mouth and immediately feel aligned. Maybe it's placebo. Maybe it's digestion magic. Who's to say? But as you lean back and sigh, you realize something. For all the absurdity, there's a strange, charming comfort in believing that the stars care whether your dinner gives you indigestion. Maybe astrology didn't cure anyone's gut troubles. But it sure gave them something to blame that wasn't the cook. You burp softly. The Cancer lady nods with sympathy and whispers, "Ah, Jupiter just peeked out. Happens to everyone." You smile. Maybe she's right. The lute picks up a gentle rhythm again, soft as breath on a window pane. Someone nearby lights a fresh taper candle, and its golden flicker dances up the stone wall like it's trying to whisper secrets to the stars. You settle deeper into your chair, stomach warm, fingers scented faintly of moon water and rosemary. Dessert is slowly vanishing from platters. The bread basket, once overflowing, sits slumped and exhausted. Everyone's full. But nobody's leaving. Because the feast isn't over. Now comes the final course. Not of food, but of fate. Yes, my friend, this is the part of the dinner party where someone decides it's the perfect time to read your astrological chart out loud, in front of your fellow guests. Welcome to medieval post-dinner divination. Because after stuffing yourself with planetary-aligned goose, turnips, figs, and ale, you should absolutely listen to someone tell you you'll be cursed with heartbreak unless you avoid dogs on Thursdays. You notice one of the lords at the head table unrolling a scroll with exaggerated flair. It's long, comically long. He snaps it open, nearly hitting a picture, and begins to read. Sir Orwyn of Bramber, born during the waxing moon of Sagittarius, beware the 7th hour after sunset when Mars opposes your house of leisure. Sir Orwyn nearly chokes on a candied walnut. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. Personal horoscopes were extremely popular in medieval Europe, especially among the elite. Wealthy nobles often hired astrologers to create natal charts, which mapped the sky at the exact moment of their birth. These charts were used to advise everything from when to travel, to whom to marry, to whether they should engage in battle or stay home and pet their dogs. And yes, these charts sometimes made dramatic appearances at dinner parties. Especially if the host wanted to impress everyone with how cosmically in control they were. You glance around the room. Half the guests look smugly intrigued, the other half look like they're desperately praying their birth hour was lost in a fire. The Cancer lady next to you pulls out a tiny vellum booklet, her personal ephemeris. She flips through it like she's searching for a juicy quote. Mercury's retrograde in your 8th house, she murmurs. You should watch your spending. Also your friendships. Also, possibly your teeth. You thank her and immediately reconsider dessert. Now for your quirky fringe tidbit. There are recorded accounts of dinner hosts commissioning event horoscopes, charts not just for guests, but for the feast itself. The idea was that the moment the first course was served became the chart's birth, and its alignment determined how the evening would unfold. This meant someone literally sat there, glancing at the stars, and whispered, "Serve the stew. Now." Because 2 minutes earlier and the moon was square with Saturn. Disaster. Tonight's host, clearly a fan of this method, proudly holds up an ornate chart painted in gold ink. Mars is in the 12th house, he declares dramatically. A night of hidden truths and strong drink. A cheer goes up. Goblets are raised. Someone claps. You realize this is less fortune-telling and more medieval karaoke night. Everyone's performing their chart, boasting about trines and lamenting squares. One man actually stands up and announces, "I was born during a lunar eclipse in Scorpio. My life is suffering," and sits back down like he just dropped the mic. Historians still argue whether these public chart readings were taken seriously or were more of a party trick. Some suggest they served as medieval icebreakers, helping guests mingle and laugh. Others argue that for many nobles, these readings were deadly serious and could sway decisions for years. Tonight, the atmosphere feels somewhere in between. The Cancer ladies predicting someone's third child will be a dramatic Leo. A young page is blushing as an older knight tells him, "Your Venus is strong. You'll charm someone before harvest." The host now shifts focus. "Let us draw lots for planetary favor." He holds up a small velvet pouch. Inside, stones, each etched with a planetary glyph. Guests take turns drawing one to see which planet favors them tonight. You reach in. Your fingers brush cool stone, smooth as worry beads. You pull out. Jupiter. The Cancer lady gasps softly. Expansion. Wisdom. You'll dream big tonight. Someone else groans. I got Mars. That means heartburn. The joke lands. The whole room chuckles. And then comes the real twist. A servant wheels out a small wooden table with a zodiac wheel carved into its top. In the center, a shallow bowl of water. Floating gently in the water, small slips of parchment, each curled into tiny scrolls. This is no dinner game. This is hydromancy, a form of water divination believed to be extra powerful under moonlight, especially when the moon is in Pisces, like it is tonight. One by one, guests fish out a scroll and read their night message. Some are poems. Some are warnings. Some are riddles. One simply says, "Do not trust chickens." You draw yours and unravel it slowly. It reads, "When Venus dreams beneath your window, be still. The moment will pass if chaste." You have no idea what it means, but it sends a little thrill through you anyway. As the wheel turns, you realize, this is what the whole evening has been building toward. A sort of soft unveiling. Not just of fate, but of everyone's deeper self. All through dinner, you talked about signs, flavors, digestion, planets, timing. But now, you're talking about what might come next. You're gazing outward while looking inward. Someone starts softly singing an old song about the North Star guiding lost travelers. Others hum along. The fire crackles, and candles flicker with almost synchronized rhythm. It's all very poetic until one scroll bursts into flames from being held too close to the candelabra. The reader, unfazed, simply shrugs and says, "Mars strikes again." The Cancer lady hands you a final fig. "For Venus," she says. "She rules beauty and digestion." You nod, eat it, and glance at the sky one more time. You came for dinner. You stayed for destiny. And now, with your Jupiter scroll in your pocket and a stomach full of lunar-aligned tarts, you feel oddly ready for anything. Maybe the stars didn't make this meal perfect, but they sure made it unforgettable. You've just settled back in your seat, a Jupiter scroll tucked in your sleeve and a belly full of fig and fate, when the host claps twice and announces, "It's time to fortify our spirits." And no, he doesn't mean with another toast, though that's likely coming too. He means literal spirits. You follow the slow current of guests as they begin to drift toward the far end of the hall, where a collection of gleaming bottles and clay jugs await on a wide oaken sideboard. Behind them stands a man in a copper-stained apron, eyes twinkling like someone who knows the future's about to taste a little strange. Welcome to the strange and fizzy world where alchemy, astrology, and ale collide. The drinks tonight aren't just fermented, they're infused with intention. That wine over there, bubbled under a waxing moon and aged in a barrel carved with astrological glyphs. That honeyed mead, brewed only during Leo season, when the sun is strongest and supposedly bestows courage and charisma. And that mysterious, cloudy liquor with the deep gold hue, laced with what the brewer calls essence of Saturn, which tastes like regret and probably involves licorice. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 14th and 15th centuries, alchemy wasn't just for cloaked figures in crumbling towers. Many noble households had access to kitchen alchemists, part pharmacist, part chef, part medieval barista, who blended the mystical with the medicinal. Astrology played a central role. It was believed that planetary alignments influenced not only when you brewed a tonic, but also how effective or dangerous it might become. And yes, those concoctions often ended up as post-dinner beverages. Tonight's brewmaster explains, this ale was begun on a Thursday, under Jupiter's rule, so it enhances wisdom and merriment. Not to be confused with Tuesday ale, which makes you argumentative. You nod slowly, like that makes total sense, and accept a cup. You take a sip. It's odd, peppery, sweet, faintly herbal, definitely brewed by someone who once said let's add a feather and see what happens. The Cancer lady lifts her cup like a chalice. Jupiter's ale brings vivid dreams, she says. Drink too much and you might wake up thinking you're a goose. You make a mental note to limit yourself to half a goose worth. Now for your quirky fringe tidbit. Some alchemists believed that metals, especially gold, silver, iron, and copper, were earthly reflections of the planets. Gold for the sun, silver for the moon, iron for Mars, and so on. So naturally, these metals were sometimes steeped in beverages or ground into powders and added to elixirs. And yes, people drank that. Intentionally. Gold leaf in wine wasn't just for show. It was for strength, clarity, and sun-blessed resilience. You glance over and notice a jug labeled solar tonic, glittering faintly under the candlelight. Next to it, another labeled mercurial cordial with a warning: best consumed before sundown unless you wish to hear my speak. Someone's clearly having fun. But there's a layer beneath the whimsy. These potions, as odd as they sound, were crafted with real care, using everything from herbs picked under specific stars to distilled rainwater gathered at moonrise. It's easy to scoff until you remember medieval people didn't exactly have Pepto-Bismol. A Venus elixir made with fennel and rose might have been their best option for post-feast bloating. Or heartbreak. Historians still argue whether these alchemical beverages were truly believed to alter mood or fate, or if they were more about status, an elite version of, "Oh, you're still serving plain cider." We've moved on to lunar elixirs with crushed garnet. You glance around the room. A noble woman swirls a deep blue liqueur that smells faintly of mint and cloves. This was stirred with a wand carved under the influence of Neptune, she tells her neighbor. It enhances imagination and selective memory. You watch as her neighbor drinks 2 cups in a row. Meanwhile, a troubadour by the hearth sings softly about a prince who drank a Mars tonic and accidentally challenged a rooster to a duel. The story's probably made up, but honestly, you wouldn't be surprised. One servant passes around a tray of tiny cups filled with something murky and green. You catch the scent of basil, something lemony, and possibly wormwood. Mercury infusion, she explains. For communication. Drink this and you'll find the right words, even if you've had 6 syllabubs and just insulted the bishop's beard. The bishop, several seats away, is too busy hiccuping into his ale to notice. A younger guest beside you is taking meticulous notes on each drink. You ask why, and he replies, "My master believes planetary infusions can rewrite the humors. You know, balance the black bile and phlegm." Ah yes. Nothing says balanced digestion like planetary mucus control. But the drinks keep coming. And now, the host invites you to step forward and mix your own. Before you sits a table of base spirits, ale, mead, wine, even a weak beer. Beside them, labeled jars of herbs, spices, and, of course, powders tied to the planets. Venus, rose petals, vanilla, fennel. Mars, pepper, cinnamon, iron filings, maybe skip that. Saturn, sage, mugwort, smoked salt. Jupiter, clove, honey, anise. Mercury, mint, thyme, silver dust. Moon, chamomile, jasmine, moon-charged water. Sun, citrus, gold flakes, rosemary. You tentatively choose moon water and chamomile, add a pinch of jasmine, and finish with a swirl of silver dust just because you like the sparkle. You sip. It's surprisingly calming. Warm, gentle. Like being wrapped in a blanket of fog. You hear a soft burp behind you. The bishop is asleep in his chair, snoring through his mustache. You're not sure if your drink is working, but you're definitely not challenging any roosters tonight. The Cancer lady lifts her own cup and says, "To dreams untroubled." And bowels unblocked. Everyone clinks cups again. And for a brief moment, as the fire crackles, music hums, and candlelight flickers across the silver rim of your cup, you feel like you've drunk not just something herbal or alchemical, but something timeless. Not because of the ingredients, not because of the astrology, but because of the strange, beautiful truth that someone, hundreds of years ago, believed a flower picked under the right star could change your fate. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. The stars outside have shifted, just barely. The night is deepening into its softest layer, like velvet over the stone bones of the city. A few guests have begun to drift off on benches, draped in wool throws or curled like housecats near the hearth. But the truly committed, the astrologers, the charmers, the odd cousin who's been chewing a cinnamon stick for an hour, are still going strong. That includes you, because something curious has just been whispered around the long oak table. Some foods aren't merely disliked on certain nights, they're outright banned. Yes, you heard that right. Forbidden foods. And not because they spoil. Because the stars said so. You lean in, the amber glow of the candle catching in your cup. Someone nudges a bowl of pickled onions away with real fear in their eyes. Welcome to the peculiar underbelly of medieval dining, where an out-of-place clove of garlic can spell doom, disgrace, or at the very least, an unfortunate rash. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, particularly in households where astrology held real sway, there were long-standing beliefs that certain foods interacted poorly with planetary influences. A noble with access to an astrologer might be advised to avoid eating root vegetables while Mars was combust, or to skip dairy altogether during a Venus square. Garlic and onions, spicy or hot foods according to the humoral system, were especially suspect. Not because of flavor, but because they might rouse lust, aggression, or reckless behavior when paired with the wrong planetary alignment. Of course, all this is layered over that ever-present medieval logic stew: astrology, humoral theory, and a pinch of my aunt swears it made her goat explode. Take tonight, for instance. A guest across the table reaches for a bowl of roasted leeks, only to have the host's steward gently shake his head. Mars is high, he says, grave as a judge. That would be unwise. The guest shrugs and selects boiled turnips instead. And honestly, you can't blame him. The last time someone ignored planetary advice earlier in the evening, they sneezed so hard their wig fell into the soup. Now for your quirky fringe tidbit. There were real cases in which monasteries, guided by strict calendars tied to both liturgical and astrological cycles, would restrict specific foods not just by day but by star influence. Some monks refused pungent foods during lunar eclipses. Others believed eating beans while Saturn was retrograde would lead to dreams of beasts. Whatever that means. And then there were personal prohibitions. Food astrologers, paid handsomely by nervous nobles, would tailor lists of what not to eat depending on your natal chart. If you were a Virgo with a weak Mars placement, no spicy sauces, ever. If your moon opposed your sun, skip goat's milk, or else. You eye the butter dish and realize, you've been playing flavor roulette all night. A guest to your left leans close. Don't eat pears while Mercury is stationary, he whispers. They'll twist your thoughts. That's how my cousin tried to marry his falcon. You start to laugh, but the look in his eyes is too sincere. And now comes your open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue whether these food restrictions were rooted more in genuine astrological conviction or were used as a form of social signaling, an elite way to show off mystical knowledge or dietary refinement. After all, declaring I can't eat cabbage tonight, Venus is in Aries does make you sound impressive, or insane. Possibly both. But tonight, nobody's scoffing. The forbidden food rules are followed with quiet, almost sacred precision. The steward returns, placing a covered dish before the host. He lifts the lid slowly, and the table lets out a collective gasp. Inside, a plump, roasted partridge, glazed with honey, stuffed with cloves and garlic. A planetary gamble. The host looks around. Yes, Mars is high. But so is the moon. The balance may hold. The Cancer lady exhales through her nose. It's madness, she murmurs. But it smells divine. You get a slice. The garlic is sharp, the honey mellow. It's the kind of dish that makes you feel like you could challenge fate with a toothpick. And maybe that's the point. Medieval people weren't just fearful of the stars. They danced with them. They flirted. They argued back. The forbidden food rules weren't only restrictions, they were rituals of respect. Eating the wrong food on the wrong night wasn't just a health risk. It was a breach of etiquette. Like wearing red to a funeral. Or calling the king dude. You notice another trend. Guests are subtly matching their food to their mood or trying to shift it. A man who's been gloomy all evening orders spiced beef in the hopes that a Mars-flavored boost will rouse his energy. A woman nervously awaiting a suitor drinks moon water steeped with rose hips to calm her nerves. One daring guest, clearly a Leo, asks if there's any forbidden absinthe. The steward replies, "Only if you wish to speak to your ancestors before dessert." Laughter ripples through the hall, but nobody dares ask again. It's fascinating, this idea that you could avoid conflict, bad luck, even heartbreak just by skipping the onions or refusing cheese on a Saturn day. Some astrologers took it further, claiming that eating the wrong thing during a planetary retrograde could leave you vulnerable to curses, or invite bad dreams, or open your body to malicious spirits. You now look at your fig tart like it might bite back. But as the feast winds on, something odd happens. The forbidden foods start to feel deliciously tempting. A guest in the far corner slowly bites into a pickled radish said to be a Mars danger food. Nothing happens. Or at least nothing obvious. They smirk. The Cancer lady notices. "He'll regret that by moonset," she says, sounding a bit too pleased. And maybe he will. Or maybe it's all superstition dressed in garlic and legend. But as your own plate is cleared, you think about all the tiny decisions that went into tonight's menu. The horoscopes. The stars. The strange, beautiful logic that said, "Not tonight, sweet onion." And you find yourself wondering, what might the stars ban tomorrow? The fire is burning lower now, its soft golden glow clinging to the banqueting hall like the last whispers of a dream. A few candles sputter and gutter, as if nodding off. You've eaten roast partridge with caution, avoided forbidden pears with quiet triumph, and survived a flirtation with Mercury tonic without becoming best friends with a goose. Not bad. But just as you think the evening might taper off into drowsy harp music and a few snoring guests under embroidered cloaks, a servant appears, carrying a large silver tray covered in lace. Time for dessert. Or more accurately, time for divination in dessert form. Because in this hall, sweet things don't just end the meal, they open a door to the future. Tonight, you're about to discover how dessert becomes destiny. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, divination was a regular part of both religious and domestic life. People read omens in everything, from candle wax to egg whites, spilled salt to strange dreams. But one lesser-known practice, especially among those who could afford elaborate feasts, was culinary divination, using food, especially desserts, to predict the future. Some of it was theatrical, some deadly serious. All of it involved the belief that fate could be stirred, spiced, and spooned onto a platter. And so, here comes your plate. A delicate candied fig, its surface caramelized to a gentle crackle. But it's not shaped like a figure. It's been sculpted into the form of a tiny goat, hooves and horns included. You blink. The steward leans in and murmurs, "Ah. A Capricorn. This means endurance. Or a long winter. Or, possibly, you'll marry someone with nice knees." You manage a polite nod, uncertain whether to thank him or flee. You look around. Another guest receives a sugared apple carved into a swan. "Romance is coming," the steward says with a wink. A man 2 seats over gets a pastry shaped like a bell. "News from afar," the steward explains. And someone at the far end receives a cinnamon biscuit shaped like a broken wheel. Everyone goes quiet for a moment. Then the Cancer lady whispers, "Travel accident." The man with the biscuit stares at it like it might bite him back. Here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Some noble households employed specialized dessert seers, cooks or herbalists trained to shape sweets not just for taste but for meaning. They'd use dough, fruit, or spun sugar to sculpt little edible omens, often based on the zodiac, planetary symbols, or even dreams shared by the host. The practice was seen as a whimsical but powerful way to connect the indulgence of dessert with the mystery of the cosmos. Some of the shapes were standard keys for opportunity, birds for change, rings for marriage, but others were highly personalized. In one Italian court, a guest once received a marzipan owl riding a fish. No one quite knew what it meant. The guest married a sailor a month later. You nibble the goat's horn. It tastes like honey and orange peel. Crisp and strange. You feel no sudden epiphany, only a mild sugar rush and the vague feeling that your destiny might involve snow and excellent footwear. Historians still argue whether these edible predictions were taken seriously or simply meant as playful performance, an after-dinner parlor trick with enough wiggle room for later interpretation. One guest might laugh off the meaning, while another would spend days dissecting it with their astrologer. What does it mean that my goose had 3 wings? Am I cursed if I ate the wheel upside down? The Cancer lady, who seems to know everything, murmurs that certain hosts even rigged the meanings, giving rivals desserts with bad omens, and suitors sweets shaped like hearts or locks. It's not just pastry, she says. It's power. At the far end of the table, a younger guest receives a sugar rose. They smile, hopeful. Their neighbor hisses, "Was it closed or blooming?" because apparently that detail matters. Blooming means a romance is maturing. Closed means something hidden. Wilting. Well, best not to think about wilting. A tray of small crystal dishes now makes its way around the room. Each one holds a tiny egg-sized pudding, topped with a sliver of gold leaf. Beneath the surface, a hidden charm waits. You're told to eat slowly. Inside your pudding, a small iron nail. You pause. The steward chuckles. Hard work ahead. Possibly carpentry. Possibly heartbreak. Maybe both. Next to you, someone finds a tiny coin, wealth or taxation, depending on your morals. Another guest finds a miniature wooden ring. Commitment or entrapment. Love's tricky that way. It's all equal parts silly and sinister. Guests laugh and gasp, but every now and then, someone grows quiet. Staring at a symbol. Turning it over in their fingers. Looking up at the stars. The hall smells of sugar and spice, almond paste and fate. You're handed one last thing, a folded piece of parchment tucked beneath your plate. You open it. A single word in careful ink. North. You look at the steward. Does this mean I should travel? He smiles gently. It means you should ask yourself what awaits you there. You stare at the word again. North. Could be a direction. Could be a person. Could be something buried in snow, waiting. It's ridiculous. It's completely irrational. But part of you, the part that loves the smell of clove and the way stars seem to hum when no one's talking, believes it a little. Because that's what dessert divination is really about. Not just knowing the future. Inviting it. Letting the stars swirl not just in the sky, but on your tongue. Letting fate be soft, and sweet, and slightly sticky. And tonight, as the candles dim and the final crumbs are brushed away, you find yourself wondering, will the goat return? And if it does, will it bring snow? Someone's harp string snaps with a soft twang in the background. You blink, startled. The sound slices through the gentle haze that's settled over the room like warm steam. A few guests flinch, one murmurs something about a bad omen, and someone else quickly tosses salt over their shoulder. You're well past the height of the feast now. Dessert has come and gone, fortunes read and misread, and the roasted partridge has either blessed or doomed your digestive tract, results pending. But don't be fooled, the party isn't over. Because this is where things get interesting. As the stars shift once more, the final course of any properly astrologically themed medieval feast isn't food. It's omens. Strange ones. Tonight, you're about to witness what nobles and commoners alike once believed, that the universe leaves breadcrumbs at the table. You just have to know where to look. And sometimes, those breadcrumbs are literal. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, it wasn't unusual for households, especially the wealthy and the mystical, to read signs and symbols from the remains of the meal. The idea of interpreting the aftermath of a dinner as divine communication was tied to both astrological belief and older folk traditions. A dropped spoon, a wine stain, or a cracked plate wasn't just clumsiness, it might be a message from the stars, a spirit, or fate itself. Tonight, those signs are everywhere. Take the broken lute string. A musician quietly gathers it, eyes wide, and wraps it around a sprig of rosemary. To bind away discord, she mutters. You're not sure if she's talking about the music or her in-laws. Then someone sneezes loudly, 3 times in a row. Everyone freezes. The Cancer lady gasps. 3 sneezes during waxing moon? That's a warning. Something hidden's about to be revealed. Across the table, a guest knocks over a goblet. The wine spreads in a perfect half-moon across the tablecloth. A journey interrupted, the steward says grimly. Now here comes your quirky fringe tidbit. There was a recorded tradition in certain medieval Germanic households of performing a table omen sweep after large banquets. The host, or a chosen guest, would walk around the table inspecting crumbs, spilled sauces, broken utensils, and even the patterns left by cooling candle wax. In one case, a spilled gravy blotch resembling a fish was interpreted as a prophecy of a flood. In another, a fork bent backward suggested treachery. These rituals weren't just games, they were serious enough that hosts might delay travel plans, marriage negotiations, or even legal proceedings based on what the table revealed. You, naturally, can't resist playing along. You drop your napkin. It lands folded in a triangle. The steward raises one brow. Decision ahead, he says. And not an easy one. You look at your remaining bread crust, which has somehow torn itself into the shape of a crude arrow. It points toward the empty seat at the table. You blink. Don't worry, the steward says with a small smile. It only means someone's on their way. Or perhaps, you've forgotten someone. Delightful. At the head of the table, the host stands. He raises a hand, calling for silence. Guests, he says, we enter now the moment of omen. Stay sharp. As if you weren't already gripping your chair. Each guest is handed a candle stub. You're told to light yours and let it burn until the flame flickers. Then stare at the wax, and watch for shapes. Yours drips into a spiral. Cycles, whispers the steward. Or secrets. Or intestines. You make a note to watch what you eat tomorrow. Historians still argue whether these post-dinner omens were meant as true spiritual readings or were simply ways to keep guests engaged and mildly anxious after a long meal. Some scholars suggest they were a form of entertainment for the elite, a dinner theatre extension of folklore. Others insist that many nobles made real decisions, political, personal, and otherwise, based on what the soup spoon did or didn't point to at midnight. You believe it, especially as a low growl of wind moves past the outer shutters, and the candles all flicker in unison. A ladle clatters to the ground. A plum falls off the table with a strange splat. Then the Cancer lady shrieks. A fig has burst on her plate. Just collapsed into sticky pulp. It's a sign, she wails. I knew the goat meant death. Someone passes her a napkin. Or it meant jam. No one laughs. You're starting to realize the longer the feast goes, The thinner the veil becomes between superstition and certainty. A fallen knife can feel as heavy as a sword. A sour sip of wine might sour your whole year. And yet, some guests lean into it. They scrape sauce into circles, testing the edges of their fortunes. They whisper meanings behind flickering shadows on the walls. One guest stares at the charred edge of a roast beet and mutters, "My father's name. I see it." Another breaks a crusty roll and gasps, "It's hollow inside." The room goes quiet again. Hollow bread, the steward says solemnly, means emptiness to come. A season without closure. Or poor baking, someone whispers, but they don't sound convinced. You look at your own plate. Crumbs in the shape of a crown. A smear of jam forming a tail. A cracked almond. Do you dare interpret it? You do. The steward squints. A rise. Then, a break. Then something foreign enters your life. You nod slowly, as if this makes perfect sense. The wind whistles again, and a door in the hallway creaks open and shut. Nobody's near it. Nobody moves. The fire is dimming. The party is winding down, but it's not sleepy. It's spooky now. Reverent. You sense that even the skeptics are holding their breath, wondering what meaning might emerge from a spoon, or a spot of sauce, or the tiny clink of a ring falling to the floor. Even you, who started this evening unsure whether figs could truly predict your future, are suddenly staring into a crust of bread like it might give you answers about your life you never thought to ask. Tonight, the stars have eaten. And now, they speak. One guest stands slowly, brushing crumbs from their lap. "It's late," they say softly. "And I think I've learned what I needed to know." Others murmur agreement. But no one rushes. Because every plate tells a story. And every splatter might be the universe whispering something only you can hear. The music has faded into a single, lingering note, like a sigh. You're sitting back in your chair, full of bread, roast, candid symbols, planetary wines, and omens you still haven't decided whether to take seriously or secretly commit to memory forever. Around you, the great hall exhales. A few guests yawn. One gently slides under the table, blissfully asleep on a cushion. But you're not asleep yet. Because the stars haven't finished their work. In fact, this might be the most fated part of all. This is the moment when everything goes wrong, and everyone insists, "Ah yes, the stars warned us." It starts with a shriek. Not from the Cancer lady this time, but from the kitchen. A clattering crash. Then the unmistakable scent of burned pears wafts through the air. You exchange glances with the steward. He frowns. "Ooh, that'll be the Mercury retrograde." "Ah, of course." Here's your mainstream historical fact. While the phrase Mercury in retrograde gets tossed around today by people explaining tech failures and bad dates, medieval Europeans also feared planetary retrogrades, especially Mercury's. Astrologers believed that when a planet appeared to move backward across the sky due to Earth's own orbit, it caused disruptions in that planet's domain. Mercury, tied to communication, travel, and fine-tuned timing, was considered especially chaotic when retrograde. In the Middle Ages, this could mean anything from botched diplomacy to failed recipes to, yes, ruined dessert. The pears were meant to be poached in rosewater and saffron. Instead, they've turned black and sunken, like collapsed lungs. The steward mutters, "We shouldn't have attempted fruit during Mercury's turn." You nod solemnly. Naturally. But it doesn't stop there. Someone sneezes again, 4 times this time. That's a double reversal under Gemini, warns a nearby guest. Bad luck for twins. Or decisions. Or upholstery. Then the host accidentally spills his wine, which somehow soaks his chart of planetary timings. The ink bleeds in spirals, as if the stars themselves are laughing. You glance at your silver spoon. It's bent. Was it like that earlier? The harp, previously quiet, gives one final plink without being touched. The steward appears at your side. "You should probably go," he says in a low voice. Before the Venus hex shows up. You raise an eyebrow. Venus hex? Oh, just a love triangle that ends with someone's beard being set on fire. Minor stuff. As if on cue, a mild argument breaks out near the fire over who received the most accurate dessert omen. "Your almond wasn't even cracked," one man protests. "That's not a sign of truth, it's indigestion." Someone else points to the ceiling. "Did that tapestry just move?" Guests are standing now, murmuring softly. There's tension in the air. Not panic, this isn't a coup or a demon summoning, just the heavy, expectant kind of silence that clings to fate mid-misfire. Here's your quirky fringe tidbit. In a few recorded banquets, if a party began to unravel under a bad alignment, the astrologer or host would declare the night celestially expired. Guests were expected to leave swiftly and silently, before the bad luck settled. In some places, hosts even rang a small bell, signaling that the stars had left the room. Superstitious nobles might even burn herbs, sage, thyme, or rue on the way out to cleanse themselves of any cosmic klingons. Your host, bless him, reaches for a silver bell. The guests collectively hold their breath. The bell rings, softly. That's your cue. Everyone begins to move, slowly, politely, but definitely purposefully. It's a strange sight, elegant guests in velvet and brocade, tiptoeing through spilled wine and broken crusts as if navigating a battlefield of invisible energy. The steward hands you a small pouch. Inside, herbs. "Burn them when you reach your chamber," he says gently. "And maybe leave a fig on the windowsill. Just in case." You don't even question it. Historians still argue whether these chaotic endings were genuine astrological fallout or simply a way to explain the very human tendency for things to unravel after too much food, wine, and complicated table omens. Some scholars suggest these final superstitions were a kind of release valve, allowing guests to leave with mystery instead of embarrassment. After all, if your pudding exploded and someone cried over a cookie goat, isn't it more elegant to blame the stars? You step out into the night. The air is cool and gentle, and the moon hangs low like a watchful eye. Behind you, the great doors of the hall close with a soft thunk. Somewhere inside, a guest sighs, and another says, "We'll try again next season." You smile to yourself. Because in truth, it was all ridiculous and also completely magical. A dinner party written in the stars, hosted in a time when the cosmos was a guest at every meal, and dessert might know your heart better than you do. You walk on, herb pouch in hand, goat omen in memory. And though your spoon is bent, your soul feels strangely aligned. The cobblestones are damp with moonlight now, the kind of silver glow that seems to wrap around your ankles and hush your footsteps. The laughter and clatter of the banquet hall have faded into the soft rustling of trees and the distant chirp of something nocturnal, but friendly. You pass under an archway wrapped in ivy, its leaves swaying just slightly, as if waving you home. And maybe they are. The stars above you don't shimmer so much as they breathe, steady, slow, ancient. The same stars those medieval hosts watched, squinting up from castle towers and garden walls, looking for signs in the sky the way we look for messages in our inboxes. They wanted the same thing we all want, really: comfort, meaning, a sense that the chaos of the world has a pattern if you just tilt your head right. Tonight, you've feasted with those dreamers. You've sniffed the soup of Saturn, spilled wine under Mars, chewed on fate-shaped figs, and nodded along as someone whispered that your dessert meant eternal devotion or possibly an ingrown toenail. And now, you can let all that soften. Let it blur a little. Let the crumbs of ancient superstition melt into the gentlest kind of dream. Because your body is heavy now. Full, warm, safe. And the stars? They're quiet now. Just watching. So breathe slowly. In and out. Let your muscles loosen, Your thoughts drift like candle smoke. Tomorrow will come with new signs and silly omens. But tonight belongs to rest, to hush, to you. Sleep well.